Good morning. I'm A.R. Roddy from Real Life Innovations, and this is my Real Life Innovations blog. Recently, I've done a couple blogs where I deal with trauma, living inside of a trauma, and strategies for rebuilding after a trauma. Since I've done those videos, I have found myself engulfed by people with trauma, by questions, by inboxes on Facebook, phone calls about living within a trauma. I actually had a young woman who called me who was I think she was 19 years old, who was in a trauma after having an abortion. And I know about that trauma, and so she was suicidal, and so I kind of went on a rescue mission and got her and brought her to my home. I just wanted to tell you today who I am and why I call myself a trauma specialist, because sometimes people just don't know who you are and they don't know your story. Yes, I do have a degree in psychology, so I do understand the clinical aspects of post-traumatic stress disorder. However, nothing that I learned in a book prepared me for what I do now. What prepared me for what I do now is living a life filled with trauma. I'll start from the beginning. As a young woman, or as a little girl even, at 5 years old, I went through incest. I suffered incest. And from that point on, up until maybe 12 years old, I had suffered incest from many different people in my family. At the age of 9 years old, I was gang raped in a community that I lived in Mount Clemens, Michigan. I was forced to sit in front of these boys and tell them, their parents, my story. And then I had not only their parents, but my mother, who didn't believe me. From there, when I was 12, I was molested by a man who was, I believe, about 40, who lived in my uncle's home. And it was a continual thing. I've gone through being ripped from my family, placed in foster homes, being approached for sexual favors as a child in a foster home, and then being ripped again from families. I've gone through divorce. I've gone through the death of a child. I've gone through miscarriages. I've gone through the trauma of rejection, the trauma of abandonment. One would think that I've lived a life of trauma, and I have. And finally, recently, 4 years ago, I went through the trauma of a seriously tragic accident that left my daughter, my then 7-year-old daughter, now 10-year-old daughter, total care, wheelchair bound with a trach, and this whole incident with the accident left my family in trauma, because it was not just my daughter, it was my daughter-in-law and 2 of my granddaughters and my grandson that were in that vehicle that was hit. And we were sitting at a stoplight coming off the expressway in Port Huron, Michigan, when we were rear-ended by a pickup truck going from what they say 55 to 70 miles per hour. and we were hit full force. And if you go on Facebook, you'll be able to see the van that they pulled us out of. They literally had to open it up like a tuna can to get us out. And there's literally no explanation of why any of us are even still alive other than God's mercy and His grace. And so when I say that I'm a trauma specialist, it's not just because I have the degree to back that up. I have the experience. I have the knowledge because I've lived through it. I can sit here and tell you that what post-traumatic stress is, the history of post-traumatic stress, the clinical explanation of post-traumatic stress, but none of that is going to prepare you for what post-traumatic stress really is. None of that is going to prepare you for what it feels like to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. They'll tell you you'll have nightmares. They'll tell you you'll have day terrors. They'll tell you all the things that are common symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But unless you've lived through it, you really don't know the agony that a person that is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder is experiencing. The nights that I walk the floor, the nights that I fall asleep crying, the images in my mind that I have to battle all day, all night, and where it literally feels like your brain is splitting in two and your mind is just going. And the days I've had to cry, God, please don't let me lose my mind, because if I lose my mind, my daughter will have no one to take care of her. And I've battled and battled with this thing. Yes, I went and got counseling, and yes, they put me on medication. And I'm going to tell you, if you are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, please get counseling. Please don't think you can handle it by yourself. A lot of things that we see people doing now in the news, killing people, killing themselves, waking up, killing their whole families, those are people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. People that have symptoms of people that have this illness that has gone untreated. Go get help. You're going to need the medication. If you don't use the medication, the anxiety of it is going to wear you out. So I know personally firsthand what post-traumatic stress disorder feels like. I also know clinically what they say it is. But I deal with people, and I have dealt with people for 31 years that have been in trauma. For some reason, people in trauma are attracted to me. And I can only say that that's a gift that God has given me, that I'm able to identify trauma and I'm able to speak to that trauma. So I just really wanted to let you know who I was and why I call myself a trauma specialist. And I have waged war on post-traumatic stress disorder. I have waged war on traumatic brain injury. I'm waging war on depression. Those are things that in the church we don't discuss. We don't discuss. So I've decided to take my ministry or calling that I have out of the four walls of the church and go where the people are that need me, because I cannot be bound by what the four walls of the church puts me in. I need to be out there telling the truth, being real with people, because people have issues that they need to get by, they need to get through so they can move on with their lives. And that's why I decided that I was going to begin Real Life Innovations, because I wanted to minister to real people who lived real lives in a real world. Because in a real world, people suffer trauma. Not one person under the sound of my voice has not been touched by some form of trauma. And we can keep sweeping stuff under the carpet if we want to, but we'll never develop as people, as whole people, until we start confronting some things that need to be confronted. So I can't confront everything because I haven't gone through everything. But what I have gone through is trauma, and I mean to confront trauma on every level that I can. I'm A.R. Roddy, and this is Real Life Innovations. Be blessed.